Toss aside the touchy-feely notions of love in business and recognize the real power it holds. Welcome to the Love is Just Damn Good Business podcast with host Steve Farber. Drawing on his work with a wide variety of companies from the Fortune 100 to smaller family-owned businesses, Farber shares inspiring interviews with business leaders and proven strategies for how you can create experiences that your customers will love by developing a culture that your employees, teammates, and colleagues love working in. Discover why and how love, at the end of the day, is just damn good business for you too. Here's your host, Steve Farber.
Hi, this is Steve Farber, and welcome to another episode of the Love is Just Damn Good Business podcast. If it hasn't occurred to you yet, and if you happen to be enjoying these podcast episodes, these interviews with these fascinating people, then I hope you will leave us a review, and I hope you will subscribe, and I hope you will listen often, and not necessarily in that order. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show today, Dan Javan. And when I say welcome back to the show, that means he was on once before. And actually, he was on about a year ago, fairly early on in the pandemic. And the last 12 months have been an interesting time for all of us, and also for Dan and his company, which is called Suntuity. So I thought it would be fun to have him back on and see what lessons he's learned as the CEO of his company over the course of the pandemic. You'll also hear an announcement in this conversation where we're making it official that Dan and his company is going to be working with me and my team at the Extreme Leadership Institute to continue to grow and foster an incredible culture that he has already begun at this great company. So Dan is a serial entrepreneur. He's a visionary. He is a natural leader, as you will soon hear. He's the founder of multiple startups. He's served on the board of various organizations, all kinds of organizations. And he's a recognized leader in clean energy, which, of course, is one of the fastest growing industries in the U.S. He is, as I mentioned, the CEO and president of the Suntuity group of companies, which is 7 or 8 companies, I believe, with 15 or 16 sub-companies under that. I mean, he's really quite the entrepreneur. And they're all focused on building a people-driven, customer-focused group of companies in the finance industry, energy industry, telecom industry, logistics, and all kinds of stuff. So Dan is a fascinating character, a deeply authentic leader, and I know you'll enjoy this conversation with Dan Javan. Hey, Dan, welcome back to the Love is Just Damn Good Business podcast. It is so great to see you again after all these many months.
Yeah, it's great to be back, Steve. Almost a year later.
Yeah, I think by the time this posts, it will be, pretty much exactly, I mean, give or take a couple of weeks, a year since our last conversation on the podcast. And so I'll give just a little bit of a reminder. And for people who haven't listened to the first podcast that we did, first of all, I highly recommend that you go back and listen to it. You don't have to listen to it first. You can listen to it after this conversation. So I highly recommend you do that. But of course, I'm biased. But there are a couple of things that I want to tag into. You told your story. We talked about your story last time. How basically you came to the U.S. with virtually just a backpack on your back as a young entrepreneur and have built this incredible venture. And then over the last 12 months, of course, what we've all experienced collectively in greater depth is the situation with the pandemic. When we spoke last time, we were pretty early on. And now that we've had, this turbulent water under the bridge, to completely massacre a metaphor, I'm curious to know how you guys have done and what you've learned as a result of doing business in COVID and what lessons you've pulled from that as a leader that you would offer to the rest of us. So I'll just start with a real broad question. How's it been going?
No, that's a good question, right? No, so it's actually been great, right? So if you want to put in one word, a lot of businesses have shrunk during the pandemic. We've actually grown, right? And to a point where, frankly, most of the real estate we have today can't accommodate most of the people we have. Prior to the pandemic, we were at about 350 to 400 employees. We're close to 650 now, right?
Wow.
So that's almost a 60% increase in headcount.
Just over the last 12 months, since the last time we talked?
That's right, just over the last 12 months, right? To a point where, a lot of the virtualization, in fact, helped us grow our call centers, grow our headcount. We had people in 11 to 12 states prior to the pandemic. Now we have people in 27 states across the U.S., right? Across multiple time zones, playing different functions. And, initially, I think when everybody got hit with the pandemic, you had this shock and awe moment where you were trying to figure out where things were going and you were trying to get your bearings. But I think the people and the companies and the leadership that prospered were the ones that were able to take immediate action. We did a lot of things both internally and externally that helped us. On the internal side, really, we virtualized almost everything within a couple of weeks. And that was not an easy task.
Yeah.
We had a lot of virtualization because we are across state lines to begin with and across country lines, but to take that to the next level is what we had to do. But also the externalization, being able to still touch and feel our customers, to do it virtually was a bit of a challenge for us and also with the employees. But really, I think what we were able to do is take leadership and let them rise to the challenge and then enable them and mentor them to actually drive that challenge is really what set us apart from a lot of our peers.
So just to interrupt you for a second, Dan, just for context. So when you say we, I mean, Suntuity is a number of different enterprises within the company. So the primary ones being solar and home building.
So we have 8 companies, right? So solar is just one of them. Solar is just our residential arm. We've got a commercial and utility scale services arm. We've got a drone division. We've got a finance arm. But really, most of our personnel are in our electrical services division, our networks division, and our solar division.
Okay.
So that combined is about 90% of the personnel we have.
Gotcha.
So it's those people.
So how much of that work is typically, when you say you virtualized a lot of the work, isn't a good amount of that physical customer contact? It
is. So I'd say about 25% of our personnel today are part of installation crews.
Okay.
So that was still in person. But to even mobilize the install crews with booties, gloves, and face masks and PPE was a bit of a challenge because you couldn't even get a mask. You couldn't get gloves if you wanted to, right? But when we saw the pandemic actually increasing, we started lining up inventory to make sure we were able to do this. And again, I talk about internal, external, virtualization, but also we took the opportunity during the pandemic to give back. One of the first things that we did when everything shut down as an organization, we got fleets of vehicles across state lines, and we volunteered our vehicles to be used for delivering food for schools, for children that depend on the schools for the only meals that they get in a day.
Right.
Right. Is that externalization, which is another means of giving back, I think is a show of leadership in the pandemic. And of course, there were some different magazines that wrote about us, not because we advertised it, but because they saw, the soft side of it. Right.
Right.
And that, in fact, eventually came back to us in spades because people came back and said they wanted to work for companies like us because we were selfless in adversity and emergency, right? And to me, those are just signs of leadership that we've tried to, mentor within our organization every time.
Yeah, sure. So you stepped up to help in the community because it was the right thing to do.
Right.
And I've heard some great stories of companies doing similar things. The part that some people overlook is what you just said. It's in order to grow, you have to attract the best talent, right? And you have to attract people whose values are congruent with your values and with the company's values. So by reaching out in the way that you did, by using your trucks to bring food to kids and people seeing that and saying, I want to work at a company like that, you're automatically setting up a kind of a filter to attract the right people who are motivated by the same thing, as opposed to the person that says, well, why the hell are they doing that? They're not getting paid for it. You don't want that person working for you, right?
Right. Yeah, attracting talent and then retaining, right? So I always tell people leave people, they don't leave companies.
Yeah.
Right? So when you set the right leadership and the right expectation, you're going to retain good talent. And for us today, our biggest challenge is not financing and it's not the need on the consumer side, it's the ability to deliver that with the right people at the helm, right? We need good people and we're always looking for good people. Human capital is what drives us as an enterprise. Everything else is a commodity.
So you've grown from 350 people to 650 people. How are you managing that on the people side of things? So many new people coming on all at once in a virtual, at a time that's characterized by a virtual working experience. Tell us how you've been managing that.
Yeah, no, it's a real challenge, right? Making sure you meet and exceed expectations for people that come on board. The first week of somebody coming on board is what sets the relationship, right? And the experiences that they go through, within that first week is critical because they either buy into the culture, because you've got to drive this based on culture, and you've got to deliver on promises, or they check out, and then they're just looking to leave and join someone else. One of the things that we've been trying to do is make sure we have processes in place so that when we onboard people, they feel like they are now part of the culture of the organization. In fact, we're looking at bringing on a chief cultural officer next month, Jenna Lynch, you're aware of her, who used to be the director of HR with Tony Robbins. Because for us, driving culture and driving leadership are synonymous with success. So making sure that they assimilate the culture, making sure there's touch points, making sure we make them feel like they belong, especially during a pandemic where everyone is remote and everyone's disconnected at some level, is what was a challenge. But it's been a lot of active management and leadership that's required that we were able to leverage to get us to where we are today. And again, we are not perfect, but we made the best effort we could in this situation.
So that culture that you're referring to, how would you characterize it? Because what I'm hearing you say is you want people, when they're coming on board, you want to give them a taste of the Suntuity culture and help them to feel like they're a part of it. What is that? What is that experience for them? What does that culture look like, feel like, sound like?
Yeah, at the very basic level, right, it is a sense of belonging to a purpose that's bigger than yourself, that's driven by morals that are, again, selfless, that are externalized. You're in this for people, planet, and profit. And if you're not in this for that order, then frankly, it's not an assimilation of the right culture that we're looking for. If you're driven and you're passionate and you're looking at doing something for someone else other than yourself, and of course, a side effect of that success is your compensation plan, your package, and things like that. And we have people that are extremely successful doing that financially and otherwise. We are one of the few organizations, a few industries, if you want to call it that, where you can actually have tremendous financial gains by doing good for others and the planet in the process, right? And we try and promote that as much as possible. So we want people that are coming in for the right reasons. If someone's coming in just for the financial gains, there's probably 20 other opportunities on Wall Street and other places where there might be better financial gains. But for us, it's got to be a happy medium and mix of that externalization of selflessness and the internalization of financial gain, I think, which is a happy medium that we try to push.
Yeah. So that if somebody is attracted to Suntuity, for example, because they've learned what you're doing in the community to help out, and they look at the company and they say, that's the kind of place that I would like to work, because their values are obviously something that's also important to me. Then they come to work for you right away. That has to be reinforced, right? As soon as they walk in the door, either literally or virtually. Because if I see, oh, here's a company that acts generously and cares about people, and I come in and I look around and I see a different dynamic, I see people talking crap about each other. Nobody's reached out to me to even ask me my name, that kind of a thing. Then there's a disconnect. So have you guys, is it just kind of a natural thing that you do, or have you really thought about all those different touch points with employees, both new and those who've been around? Or is it just something that just kind of happens?
No, I think we have to make a conscientious effort, right, to make that happen. Because on the recruiting side, we're bringing on more and more people, even on the onboarding side and the recruiting side, right? So every time you bring someone new into that initial funnel team, if you want to call it that, you've got to assimilate them into the culture so it becomes second nature to them, right? And you have to keep reinforcing that to a point where it becomes second nature for most people, right? So I look at it as a combination of process-driven with checks and balances in place with verification to a point where it becomes almost like a checklist, second nature, where it is now part of your formula and part of your mantra. And that's something that you now portray the moment you talk to someone, from the time you talk to them saying, are you interested in joining us, to the time, how was your first week with us? It's seamless. And we're not there yet, but we work every day extremely hard to build that and continue driving that to a point where we are close to perfection, or as close to perfection as possible.
So from what it sounds like, the way you're describing it so far is, the pandemic hit and you guys grew and you've given back to the community and you got great people coming in, but there had to be bumps along the way. So what kind of challenges have you guys faced?
Yeah, I mean, our biggest challenge initially was, we virtualized almost 80 to 85% of our organization. Just the IT challenges, right? Getting laptops out to people, making sure they're all set up to actually virtualize phone systems, dialer systems. That was our biggest hurdle initially. Making sure people are in a position with the right tools to be able to do the job we want them to do, right? Communication was part of it too, and communication still is, because different people, different time zones, different work ethics, different distractions, right? So that is something where management steps up to the plate to make sure they effectively communicate, not just say things, but actually communicate with their reps. And it's very different. You've got to actually teach people on the difference. It's not the same as just talking to someone. But at the same time, making sure that you have the tools necessary to be successful in a virtual environment, which was one of the major hurdles that we had to overcome. And a lot of that was restricted due to external factors. I mean, you remember, you couldn't even get a laptop if you wanted to.
Right.
Everything was sold out. And when you did, half the people didn't have the necessary internet access. Even if you get a laptop, how do you get online, right? You didn't have access to certain software solutions that were able to accommodate more than 20 or 30 people in a meeting. It's small stuff like that that adds up,
yeah.
Right? All of a sudden, it's like, how do I address 350 to 400 people in a town hall meeting, right? It's those challenges, but we've come out a lot stronger now because of that. We're better, geared up for the next situation that arises. Hopefully it doesn't ever do that, but I think we've come out a lot stronger with what happened.
And are there any, as you look back, I mean, we're not out of it yet, but at least here in the U.S., we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's getting pretty bright, which is nice. That's called an understatement. It's nice. It's nice, but it's a really good time to look back to do two things, I think, for all of us, particularly leaders and leaders of companies, is to look back and ask, what did I learn from this? What did I learn from this, or what did we learn from this that I can apply under all circumstances? And then along with that is, having looked back and the experience that we had, now as I look forward into a new reality, a new future, a new normal, what do I want to do differently as a result of what we've just been through? Which are, very closely related questions. Or another way of saying it is, what kind of a future do I want to create? How do I want it to be going forward? That's a whole volume's worth of potential answers. So I'll just stop there and just curious what comes to mind for you.
Yeah, so when we got into the pandemic, the one question I asked my leadership team is, when you look back, right, a year, 2 or 3 years, however long this pandemic takes, right, and you look back and you come back and think, what is it that you did in this historic event that differentiates you from other people, right? What did you do to rise to the occasion? Not just for the people that depend on you and your family, but people that depend on you in your, work family, right? And your consumers and your customers. What would you do, right? And that really set the tone of how we reacted to the pandemic. We looked at it as a historic event. We looked at it as an opportunity to rise to the occasion, which is why we launched multiple initiatives, including Rise with Suntuity, which if you go to risewithsuntuity.com, it talks to you about, we onboarded or we worked with Jordan Belfort and his team to set up different series of training for sales. And again, these are not just people in our sales team. If you're trying to find a job, we will train you on how to look for a job, what to do, how to actually work on a career path. We got JJ French in there to actually talk. We got Lauren LaHav to actually compare some of the stuff. You were on some of these sessions. We started putting things into place to actually start differentiating and also rising to the occasion. That's why it's Rise with Suntuity. But also putting things in place so that we start acting like it's an ongoing pandemic going forward, right? And regardless of whether you're in an actual pandemic or not, if you operate yourself with the same standards that you did while you were in the middle of a pandemic, after the pandemic, you're actually going to come out of it on top, because communication, leadership, thought process, externalization, these are front and center. So that becomes then part of your mantra going forward. So to me, it was a life-changing event for a lot of people, but you can take that and learn from that and help that drive what you do going forward, which is now something that we do part and parcel within our day-to-day actions and activities. Right. So that's really, it changed the way we started thinking, the way we started doing business. And that's not just on a virtualization, it's you stop taking people for granted, right? You mentor them, you leverage them, you enable them, whether it's in virtualization or in person, because today you had a pandemic, tomorrow it might be something else. Right. But when you start doing that, now people start driving that culture, right? And then you become a force to reckon with, which is really what we're beginning to look like right now. And, just as an example, like I mentioned to you earlier, we're now the 8th largest residential solar company in the United States. And it happened during the pandemic. And a lot of that is because of the talent we've been able to attract. And when I say largest, I'm talking about customer base, right? Not just headcount. And to me, that is extremely important. So we've gone from where we were to where we are today because of the adversity that we had to face, and we're able to rise to the occasion and deal with it accordingly. So that's really some of the changes that we've made.
Yeah. So when you look back now, and if you had, hopefully this will never be the case, but if you had to do it all over again and deal with this kind of, worldwide challenge, is there anything you would do differently knowing what you know now?
I think, I'm fairly happy with the actions we were able to take when we got hit with this. Would I change certain things? Maybe we would have got started a little sooner on some of our communications. It took us a little bit of time to just realize and get over the shock and awe. A couple of weeks. But other than that, I think we did well. One of the things that we should have done, I think, was more training with some of our managers on active management techniques, which again, we had them lined up, but they were lined up in person. We should have virtualized that. The problem is we didn't have the ability to virtualize it fast enough.
Right.
And I think that would have maybe changed things a little bit. And also communicating a little better with the customers. I think that's some of the challenges we ran into. And not because we didn't want to communicate, we just couldn't. We didn't have the tools available to us to make these things happen, especially with the kind of volume of customers that we have.
Right.
So other than that, I think, we fared, fairly well.
Yeah, I think we were all trying to figure that out. What's the new customer relationship, and how do we continue to reach out when we can't literally, reach out hand to hand, unless you're in a company like, for example, the one that we're using right now to record this interview, or a company like Zoom, where, the entire world just fell right in your lap.
Right.
And they had to do a lot of figuring out too. They had to scale really quickly, and they had to, make upgrades and all of that. They did a pretty good job, I'd say. But now we're at this juncture where we're starting to ask the question, what is the future going to look like? And, I've had this conversation with a lot of people in a lot of different contexts, and there is a temptation to say, well, everything's just going to go back to normal, which implies that there ever was such a thing as normal. It depends on how you define that. But also, I think it's a little bit naive to say that there's just going to come a time where this will all be a distant memory, because there is a price that we've paid. There's a psychological price. There's a mental health price. There's a physical price. There's a life and death price. And these things are not just something you erase from a balance sheet and move on. So I believe that we're at a juncture where, having come through this adversity, or almost through it, depending on where in the world you are, what do we want? What do we want that future to be like? It's up to us to create it. And the leadership question has always been around vision, right? What's the vision of the future that you want to create? That's always been true. But now it's I think a really significant, fertile opportunity for that. So as you look ahead for your companies, what are you thinking about? What do you want to create for the future for you and yours and your customers? Again, a small, tiny little question.
I know that's a pretty loaded question, right?
Yeah.
So, so for us, even prior to the pandemic, right, our values were driven by people, planet, and profit, right? We're a 3P company. How you do that is a different discussion point, but really we want to continue driving our values with a culture that we build that aligns itself with that, right? And, the pandemic has been almost a reset button for us, right? you can rise to the occasion and learn from it and leverage what you learned, or you can forget about it and go back to the normal sort of business that you talked about. I don't think there's any going back, because just from a growth perspective, the way we've virtualized, I don't see us going back to the old way of doing business with office spaces and things like that. And that's just a physical side of it. But the other thing is the non-physical side of it is, don't take your customers for granted. Don't take your employees for granted. Make them feel like they belong to an organization that values contributions that they make. Make sure you mentor and you drive and you enable that. Make sure you give them the tools needed to be able to participate in that. And then make sure you uplift them as they go along. And that, if you keep drawing kind of culture, I think, and you now use that going forward, you're actually going to outcompete your peers. You're going to outbid your competition. And you're going to actually drive an organization that is a force to reckon with, because when people are passionate about what they do, when they feel like they belong to something greater than themselves, they answer to a higher calling than themselves, right? So we can leverage the situation that we had and actually build and grow from there to a point where you're building so much momentum, it's very difficult to slow you down. And that's really what we're looking at doing, right? So we're looking at leveraging, enhancing that, regardless of whether you have another pandemic or not. And this is not going away anytime soon. This is going to be an on and off thing that we're going to deal with. And different countries have different situations they're dealing with. But being able to rise to the occasion and differentiate yourself is really what I see as my vision for the way we do business. And as we continue to grow, in addition to all the other good stuff that comes with it.
Right. So the conversation around, what do you want to create is like I said a couple of minutes ago, it's part of that leadership practice that we call the vision thing, right? The vision thing, which is part of our job as leaders is to establish a clear and compelling picture of the future that people can get excited about, so we can all work together to achieve that. But that's part of it. That's the vision thing. Then the question is, what do we have to do today in order to make that future vision a reality? And with a company that's growing like yours, there's no one simple answer to that. It's a lot of different things. So I want people to understand that your approach to this is both fascinating to me and gratifying, because you have shared with me before this interview that you really want to focus on, as you grow, making sure that you're doing the right things from a culture perspective. And one of the things we've talked a lot about on this podcast is oftentimes people, entrepreneurs like yourself, will build a company and give no thought to the culture. But that doesn't mean they don't have one, because every place has a culture. And then one day they look around and they go, what the hell happened to this place? We've grown so fast, and how come it doesn't feel like it used to? And you're anticipating that ahead of time, that you don't want that to happen. And one of the ways you're doing that, I know you mentioned this in passing a couple of minutes ago, and I certainly don't want to turn this into a commercial, but I think it's important that people understand that you are bringing our team in from the Extreme Leadership Institute, specifically to spearhead it, myself and Jenna Lynch, who's going to be your kind of interim chief culture officer from the Extreme Leadership Institute. So the objective is going to be getting in the weeds and helping you guys to figure out what all this looks like in every single touch point in the company. And there aren't many companies that do that. There aren't many leaders that are willing to do it to that degree, because they figured that stuff should just take care of itself, but it doesn't. So I want to make that it's kind of an official announcement that we're doing that, and I want to throw down the gauntlet and raise I'm mixing a metaphor here. Throw down the gauntlet, raise the bar, turn up the heat, whatever. Because I think you guys are going to be a really great example. I mean, you already are. But over time, as you focus more intently on the things that are important to you and making that live and breathe for every employee and customer, it's going to be a great story to tell. And, I'm all about telling the good stories. So from a personal level, I'm really, really excited about this. And really looking forward to getting in there and learning your team. Let me ask you a question that might require you to be, it's not an entirely fair question, because I'm curious how you would answer on behalf of other people. You're the CEO of this company, the founder of the company, and you have a way of describing what's going on there. If I went around the company and talked to people that work in leadership or management or your employees, would I hear a different story? And if so, what would be different, do you think? And that's the unfair part, because I'm asking you to answer on behalf of what somebody else might say.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the answer is you will hear different iterations of the culture, or what people perceive as the culture. When you ask people what the mission of the company is, it'll be unanimous, right? People, planet, and profit. That's something that we talk about. Being selfless, being able to do something for someone other than yourself, being part of something bigger than yourself. That is synonymous. How you go about that is going to be very different based on who you talk to. Some people might come back and say, well, to do that, I've got to manage a certain way. Or someone comes back and says, I will lead a certain way. So there's no correct answer. It's based on people's life experiences and what they perceive is needed from those life experiences, which is why, folks like yourself and Jenna, I think, are going to be integral to try and align that, right? I always tell people you learn more from failure than you do from success. Some people haven't failed. For some people, this is their first job and it's their first successful job. So they don't have a variety of experiences under the belt to be able to determine what the best way to do this is. Our goal is to make sure that they can learn what they need to learn without having to fail. Because if they're failing, that means their team is failing. Their team is failing, that means we fail, right? Which is why it's extremely important to make sure as we continue to drive the organization and success of the organization, we do it in a unanimous fashion. But people understand the formula and they understand the right way of doing it based on real world life experiences that folks like yourself and Jenna and other people have under your belt. It's decades of experience of what works, what doesn't work, and things like that, so that we don't fall into the same pitfalls that growing companies do, because companies grow rapidly. And they grow into this monstrosity, and then all of a sudden they just collapse and fizzle out. It's like somebody let the entire hair out of their sails because they forgot the very basics of building an organization is based on building a strong foundation.
Right.
And culture and leadership are some of the strongest pillars of your foundation as you build an organization, because then that organization has value. Otherwise, you can go overnight from here to zero because you didn't set it up the right way. All the hard work that you put in and all the success you put in, they're going to come tumbling down. It's a house of cards.
Yeah.
We're trying to make sure we don't end up in that situation.
So you've got a certain percentage of your employees, it sounds like, that are, it might be their first job or a new career, and they're ambitious and they want to do great things and they got the right value set, and you don't want them to fail. How do you guys deal with the paradox that, and I think it's a paradox, that in order to not fail, in order to succeed, i.e. not fail, as a team or as a business, you have to get really good at failing, right? I mean, that doesn't mean that there are no failures along the way, Because if you're not failing at something, that means you're not really innovating, because innovating by definition means you're trying something new, which means that you don't know if it's going to work or not because it hasn't been done before. So how do you balance that between that drive to succeed and the need to fail along the way?
Yeah, so failure is inevitable, right? Things happen, and there's no right way of doing certain things, and occasionally you do certain things that cause some kind of failure. What you do when you fail is what differentiates you from other people. And what leaders do when they see failure is what differentiates the style of leadership, right? If someone fails, and depending on who you talk to in a leadership position, you can either reprimand the person for failing, or you can mentor the person, right? If you reprimand the person, you're going to turn that person off. They're basically going to see that as a failure of their life, and they're going to probably get dejected and leave the company. And they might be a tremendous resource to the organization. Or you can tell them or mentor them, because now you're setting an example. Because what you do with them today is what they will do with folks that they lead tomorrow, right? So our goal really is to try and get a message across that there's nothing wrong with failing. But when you fail, taking ownership of that failure and rising to the occasion and being humble about it is the first step you take in overcoming that failure, right? That's just part and parcel of what we do as individuals as we grow. As an organization, our demographics are in the mid-20s, which means you've got a lot of young minds extremely passionate about what they do. Sometimes they wear the passion in their sleeves, right? And that's what you've got to manage, right? But the only way you can help them and mentor them is by leading by example, which means you need them to see what you do when failure happens, for them to replicate what they do when failure happens, right? And that's where you rise to the occasion. That's where you mentor. That's where you build a culture with an open door policy. That's where anyone can walk into your office and tell you what they feel without any thoughts of any kind of repercussions, right? If there's an issue, you work on it as a team to resolve it, right? And that's what leaders do. So that's the kind of culture that we drive in our organization. And I can tell you, most of the people you talk to in our organization will tell you we have an open door culture, where this is top down humility, leadership, and taking ownership is something that we drive, especially when it comes to failure. And that's what is causing success within our organization. Yeah,
that's a great perspective. So I want to go back to people, planet, profit. You're suggesting, it sounds to me that you're suggesting that all three of those things are important, but that there's also an order of importance, right? And you've chosen to put people first, followed by planet, followed by profit. So first of all, I'd just like you to say a little bit more about that and how all that ties together for you.
Sure. So to me, it's always been about people. If you're chasing money, money usually eludes you. That's just my personal experience in life. People work to put food on the table for their families, right? To pay their mortgage, to pay their bills and things like that. So if we lose our very focus of why we're working, which is about the people in our household, the people within our organization, the people that are actually benefiting from what we do, we already lost focus of what we're doing, right? Because that's what it's all about. And then to align that with something that actually benefits your environment, right? Because that is a shell that you live in, right? And there's only so much of it to go around before you do certain things that, what you do to leave that shell for the next generation and the generations to come is a sense of responsibility most people have to have. And a lot of people have misused that over the last several centuries, and we're paying the price for it in several places. So if you actually focus on what's important, which is really the people in the shell that they exist and the ecosystem that they exist, which is the planet, and if you do it well, you will be profitable because you have alignment of your focus. There's no other way around it. And I always tell people, don't chase money and profits chase success and excellence in what you do, the financial impact of that is a side effect of what you do. If you're focusing purely on the financial impact, you're going to do that typically at the expense of things that are far more important than just the financials. Money comes, money goes, right? You lose people, you lose relationships, you're not going to get that back, right? And if you lose focus of that, frankly, then you're in the wrong business or you're with the wrong company. So to me, that's really our order of importance. That's really how we drive this. This is what I talk about in my town hall meetings. This is what I talk about with my leadership team. And that really is what drives us on a day-by-day basis. And I think that's paid off pretty well.
Have you ever had an experience where you recruited somebody who was really talented, had a good track record, maybe a great salesperson, and then after they got through the door, began to realize that this was not a fit, that it was really about their priorities were different? It was profit, maybe profit followed by profit with a dose of profit at the end, and the others were just the shit that I got to put up with to work here?
Yeah, I mean, listen, that happens, right? It happens from time to time, but I don't know if turning them is the right word. But, I've been able to sit across the table sometimes with some folks that are extremely young and absorb information like a sponge. They've never had anyone in their life really mentor them, right? They've been in survivor mode from day one to try and survive. And, in the process, listen, I've been in that mode before, right? So I know what it feels like to try and just survive. So I can relate to people that are in that mode, but then to be able to take them and mold them into prioritizing what is important. In fact, a lot of those people, when they turn and flip that around, they are your most, strongest supporters when it comes to alignment of, your focus, right? And yes, you will still have some people where for them it's just, they want the money, they'll go to the highest bidder. At that point, you let them do what they have to. But what's amazing is we've had a huge number of people or percentage of people that have left us come back to us a year later. Saying, we went there, we tried that, and we realized that's not what we signed up for. We realized we could have made that money out here. And we could have done that with a clear conscience. And we have people that come back to us sometimes a year, 2, 3 years later, right? Saying, I want to come back into the fold and I want to do this and I want to assimilate in the culture because I went there, tried it, I failed. I made a lot of money, but I never got any satisfaction out of it. And I blew all that money up. I spent the money. I lost the money in the stock market. But my conscience kept coming back to me and saying I didn't do what I could have done right the first time, which is how do we work together again? And then they become your proponents, right?
Yeah.
Do that from experience. And to me, that is the true success. The day someone comes back to me after 2 to 3 years of leaving me and saying, this is what I left and this is what I missed the most. And this is what I want more of, to me is a sign of us doing it right.
Absolutely.
And we've had that happen quite a bit.
Yeah, that's a great testimonial to the lesson that you're helping them learn. So there's a couple things that really strike me as beautiful in that. One is there's a tendency, I think, and I think this is true from generation to generation, there's a tendency for the older generation to look at the younger generation, any point in history, you see this, and say, these kids today, they feel entitled, they want everything handed to them, there's been some version of that, it's been going on for a long time. I remember, in the 90s when I was at the Tom Peters Company, and we had clients telling us that these kids today, these millennials, they come in and they want, I had a kid come in and said, this executive told me, sat down in my office for an interview, and he said to me, what do you got for me? That kind of thing. It's always like these. What I heard you say is, then oftentimes, or at least sometimes, when somebody is motivated by profit, it could be because they've been in survival mode, which is very different from somebody being entitled or greedy or just, you know what I mean? It's which is kind of the knee-jerk reaction that a lot of people, my age might have to a kid who says, yeah, how much money can I make? And I'm just, it's about the money. I think, well, you've got your priorities all screwed up. But it's coming from a place of, this is what I've learned to do to survive. And your awareness of that, maybe it's because, like you said, that was your experience when you were younger, is a really important thing for all of us to learn, and that is, instead of making assumptions about people's motivations, where they're coming from, it's just about getting to know them a little better and understanding where they're coming from and why, and then you have an opportunity to teach and help them to never have to worry about that again on any level. It's a great lesson. And, you're really fortunate to have so many of what generation is that now? Gen Z. I love, and this is my other question about it as it relates to people, planet, profit. Are you finding that generationally, they're more a kind of this generation is more congruent with that set of values than previous generations? Are they more inclined to that to begin with?
Yeah, so my personal experience has been the newer generations are looking for more than just, and it's a conflict because depending on who you talk to, it might be a different answer. A lot of younger folks I have spoken to want to do something for the planet, right? It's not just the money that they're looking at making. But of course, they want to make the money in the process too, right? Being able to align yourself and mold them into doing it right, I think is really the challenge, because they want to do the right things, but they want to do it like now. They want immediate gratification, right? They want to see the money now while they're doing it, of course, while they're doing good things for the planet. And that's really the challenge that we run into, where being able to set a foundation for them where it's not just instant gratification that they're looking for, that you're trying to fulfill. It's overall gratification long-term by setting pieces of the puzzle in place today to actually let them benefit from that in their late 20s and 30s and so on and so forth is where the challenge is. Yeah. So when you sit down across a table with someone that's young, right, I'm usually not asking how much they're looking for. I'm trying to understand what they're trying to achieve in life. Where do they want to go 3 years from now or 5 years from now? To me, that's more important than what they're looking today from a comp structure. And 9 times out of 10, we find ways to align what we offer with what they want to do 4 or 5 years from now. Is just the path to getting to that from their perspective and our perspective might be different. But when you show them that path, and you can do that with credibility and conviction, and you can deliver on that to a point where you don't erode any level of trust that they've established in you or the respect, you now have a proponent that will go to battle for you.
Right.
And that is really what I spend more time dealing with or mentoring people for on the younger generation when I talk to them.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things we talked about in our conversation a year ago is that when you bring people into Suntuity, you want to help them with their lives in general, not just the skills that they'll need to succeed in selling solar, for example.
Right.
And it seems like that has continued, and you're building on that. Still, it wasn't just a flash in the pan. Oh, wouldn't this be a nice idea? It's the way you guys are built around there.
Absolutely, and that's how you get to retain talent, because 10, 20 years down the road, like I said, a lot of the folks that work for us, this is their first job, right? The way you mold them and the way you mentor them in their first career move is something they're going to carry for the rest of their lives. And that is not something to take lightly.
Right.
You're in a position to either make or break, the thought process for someone, and that comes with a sense of responsibility, and you want to make sure you're doing it the right way.
Right.
Which is really what we're trying to do. Which is why people come back to us. They go out there and they try it out, and they come back 2 years later and say, you know what, I liked your way better. I could sleep at night, right? I felt good about what I did, right? I felt like I belonged to something greater than myself. And I made the money anyways.
Right. Yeah. Very cool. Well, this is great stuff, Dan, and I'm looking forward. I'm honored to that we're going to be a part of the continuing story of Suntuity, and thank you for sharing some great lessons and insight that all of us can take as we look forward to the kind of futures that we want to create in our own communities and enterprises. So once again, for people who want to learn more about Suntuity, where's the best place for them to go?
So if you go to suntuitygroup.com, SUNTUITY group.com, it gives you a good understanding of the length and breadth of our organization. And I would even suggest people go to risewithsuntuity.com.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of good life lessons that you learn from some of the leaders in the industry that we have and about leadership. I think that's important too. And I think it gives you a balanced view about us as an organization.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yep.
And if somebody wanted to reach out to you directly, they may have a question for you or would like your take on something. Can they reach you through the website, or is there another way to do that?
They can send me an email direct. Send it to askdan@suntuity.com.
Okay.
Everyone in my organization uses it. It's open. So
Yeah.
askdan@suntuity.com, and I will respond.
I'm curious, how many of those emails do you get every day?
Overall, probably about 100, 120.
Wow.
And I read every one of them.
Do you? That's great. Fantastic.
Because we spread that out with our customers, we spread that out with our sales reps, different folks in the industry. So.
That's great. Terrific. I love that idea. All right, Dan, thank you so much for joining us, and for everybody tuning in. We'll see you next time. Until then, do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. See you next time.
Thanks so much, Steve. Take care.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Love is Just Damn Good Business with Steve Farber. Join us again next time, because when customer and employee satisfaction just isn't enough anymore, we are here to back you up with specific ideas to operationalize love to make an enormous difference in your business, personal life, and the world around you. Visit our website at stevefarber.com to leave a review. And don't forget to share the love with your colleagues and friends, because after all, it's just damn good business.